Greek ones that I showed you guys the picture of earlier, we are only going to look at like a very, very tiny handful, and try to make it as general as possible. So I mentioned juxtaposition before, and this is just as powerful as connotation. So instead of the words having this inherent meaning or creating new meaning, you are taking two things and putting them next to each other, and just by that association, you create some kind of different meaning. So sometimes they contrast, or sometimes they just sort of stop to make you think. So found a great example. So as I was going through and annotating my article, the one about Jefferson, there's a moment that just made me stop, where it wasn't emphasized a lot, but it's the very end of this. It was about the author going up to Monticello, and about the different exhibits that are there. And he said, there's now an exhibit of Sally Hemings. And if you're up on your history, Sally Hemings was the enslaved woman that Jefferson ended up having at least six people, or six children from. And she was kept in the house, hidden away, and just sort of for his use, which is horrific. She said, there's now an exhibit of Sally Hemings' bedroom in her cave-like living quarters in the South Wing, a room my brother and I used to play in when we were boys. And so those two things, this cave-like living quarter, where we know that she was essentially kept hostage, and essentially a sex slave, and then we have his great grandchildren just like playing around in the room. And so it's any area where it sort of stops to make you think. The meaning that comes out of this is sort of this like neglect of actual history, and at no point in this does the author, say, try to defend himself. He's surprisingly even paced. I made some comments on the tone that you can see in my annotations. He's very clear. He does not sugarcoat his childhood, and I think this was intentional. He wanted to show just like how little he engaged with the reality of his upbringing, or that his family engaged with the reality of his upbringing. So that's juxtaposition for me. There could also be juxtaposition when you're using like really formal language with really informal language. Anything that sort of makes you stop because it doesn't seem to match up. You could even say that the comment I made about founding mothers is an example of juxtaposition too. You take these two seemingly contrasting terms, just because founding fathers is what we grew up learning, and then it stops, makes you think, and creates this new meaning that can be very persuasive. Paradox is sort of related. I intentionally didn't talk about irony because it gets overused a lot, and so I don't want us looking for areas of irony, because there's tragic irony, there's dramatic irony. Irony is actually only isolated to single statements, but I think paradox is a good place for us to build off of. So paradox is when you have two seemingly contrasting statements, and it can be used to a really, really great effect. One of the best parts in here is when he's talking about the memorial. It's a shrine to a man who famously wrote that all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence, yet never did as much to make those words come true. And then gives examples of how he did not treat people equally. And so we could see a contrast between his words and his actions. So it seems paradoxical. So contrast is also perfectly acceptable. So both juxtaposition and contrast and paradox all deal with those two opposing, or what's the word I'm looking for? Two ideas that have friction between them, and that friction is supposed to get our attention and make us think a certain way. For example, this made me feel just sort of this sadness at the forgotten sorrow of Sally Hemings. This was a really good logical, I thought it was a wonderful example. It also had a pathos effect on me. Antenagogue, one of those Greek words. So these are really small things, and I'm not expecting you to go really deep and form whole paragraphs about them. I just want to give you a couple here, because this is also stuff you can use in your own arguments. If you're arguing with somebody online, or with your parents, or with your friend, or trying to get a promotion or something at work, or just trying to navigate a difficult situation without getting in trouble. These sorts of things are really helpful. So this places criticism and compliment together. It lessens the impact. We use this all the time. For example, I miss hanging out with people from campus, but I said mice, good Lord. It's nice wearing pajamas every day for online class. So the thing that you're supposed to focus on is this. I would imagine that this person is conceding to, let's say, their friend of like, yeah, campus, I know, but we need to be looking at our comfort level here. That's the thing that is more important. Whereas if you just shift them, the meaning is completely different. And so the internal structure of sentences, of clauses, is inherently rhetorical. So when we write sentences and we just sort of stick stuff wherever, we're missing a really golden opportunity to be really persuasive, to give attention to the part that we want people to take away from. So with this one, obviously they're trying to appeal to somebody's sense of loneliness, of missing out with people on campus. Enumeratio, or enumeratio? No, cio. Can't remember my pronunciation either. So it's making a point with several concrete examples. This is one that you guys are going to find in your articles. So whenever I think of enumeratio, or wherever I find it, the clip that always goes through my head is the wonderful one from Forrest Gump, which I'm just going to play a part of it.
Anyway, like I was saying, shrimp is the fruit of the sea. You can barbecue it, boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it. There's shrimp kebabs, shrimp creole, shrimp gumbo, pan fried, deep fried, stir fried. There's pineapple shrimp, lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp, shrimp soup, shrimp stew, shrimp salad, shrimp and potatoes, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich. That's about it.
So obviously being used for something humorous, he chose to take that enumeratio route of, he made his claim, shrimp are the fruit of the sea, and Tom Hanks could have said, well, what do you mean? Like, how are they the fruit of the sea? How are they, I'm guessing, like, how can you do so much with them? And then he gave all these examples, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And none of them are inherently more convincing than the one that came before it. What's convincing is just having the sheer amount of them there. And so it's the amount that becomes persuasive rather than the individual arguments. So a great example of this, this is from, 2015. Obama was at Cairo University, and he was making the claim that American Muslims are really, enriching part of the United States. And he followed that with, they have fought in our wars, they've served in our government, stood for our civil rights, they've started businesses, they've taught our universities, they've excelled in our sport arenas, they've won Nobel Prizes, they've built our tallest building, and lit the Olympic torch. All of those reasons are very, very intentional. They're also looking at these different areas of society that we value. We value our military, our government is important, civil rights is important, our economy is important, our education is important, we love our entertainment and sports, our intellectual abilities, our industry, and our representation on the world stage. So all of these examples were intentional because they're all kind of all across the board, but the sheer amount of them is also a strategy in itself. And so there's a specific part that's sort of under enumeratio that's called accumulatio. Oh, to go. Good Lord. Which is listing arguments and points of succession for emphasis. So I think the best example of this is the running list of Trump's lies that you could find on the New York Times website. And they're not trying to convince anybody with just one of these pieces. It's the fact that it continues to be running is what makes it convincing. And so it doesn't mean that one of these is not convincing in itself. It absolutely can be. But their intention is to just have so many of these examples. This is used also in courts of law. I don't know if we have any law students. We do. We have a couple law students. It ends up winning people over very easily just because they end up saying, oh, fine, I got it. Repetition and parallelism. There are like a jillion words that are specifically about repetition and parallelism. I'm fine with you guys just pulling out repetition and parallelism. And this all has to do with emphasis. So the king of this is Dr. King. We all had to read or listen to I Had a Dream. And I encourage you at some point to go back and read his stuff, even though we had to read it in like, I don't know, middle school and then again in high school. Going back at it with your rhetorical knowledge, it absolutely comes alive, and you see how every single word is intentional in there. Every single phrase. It is so meticulously woven. It's incredible. So he repeats stuff all the time. And this pastor is repeating 100 years later, 100 years later. And so some of this is because it sounds nice. A lot of rhetorical strategies are there to make something seem more lyrical. Because if you think back, that's really where rhetoric came out of. It came out of the 6th century BC, where people had to go to the Pnyx and they had to give speeches to get laws passed and stuff. And so you wanted to be convincing, you wanted to be interesting, you wanted people to listen to you, to seem educated, to seem comfortable, and for people to like be attracted to the way that you are speaking too. We've heard good speakers and not great speakers. So it sounds nice to repeat in this way, but also it shows what's important. He wants to emphasize, like, it's been so long. It's been so long. We are still waiting all this time. So there's this under sort of the subtextual argument that's connecting all of these, just by the fact that it's repeated. And I didn't see very much of this in mine. I did see like, you will learn, and then you will learn. There are a couple areas like this, and I think those were more just about sounding good. I don't think it had this inherent meaning, but I could be wrong there. Oop, I forgot to link this guy up. It's worth mentioning one that I'm sure you guys will get, sort of Tremors of Fear because of your language arts and English classes, if any of you were in like AP or anything. But alliteration and assonance, guess what? They're rhetorical strategies. Those both come from Greek words. And so alliteration is when you have the consonants at the beginning of a word that are the same and have the same sound. And then assonance is when the vowels have a similar sound. They don't have to be the same vowel, just have to make the same sound. And so I pulled out one of my favorite speeches, which is by Taylor, which was an inauguration speech where he says, the star, all of us are created equal, is the star that guides us still, just as it guided our forebears to Seneca Falls and Selma and Stonewall. So that S sound is very pleasing to hear. So most of the time, it's just there to make things sound complete and polished, and we enjoy hearing it. You'll also notice star and still has the same consonant sound at the beginning. Also, it's not just random. Seneca Falls is where the Declaration on the Rights of Women was written, which was the very first inklings of the feminist movement, first wave feminism. Selma, the March on Selma, during the Civil Rights Movement. And Stonewall, of course, we just finished Pride Month, was where the Stonewall riots, where we can have the origination of any kind of gay rights. Also, I realized, like, this is kind of like, we have the s here too, and you have the and so that could be assonance. I found this one, though, go back, a little bit later on, and there's an E sound that comes up a lot. Liberate families from the brink of hardship. We are true to our creed. When a little girl is born into the bleakest poverty, no, she has the same chance to succeed as anyone else because she's American, because she's free, she's equal. So anytime you have those vowels that sound similar, that's going to be assonance. Should you be looking for this in your essay? I don't know. I would not prioritize this stuff, but I want to show you guys that there are these other elements. So if you're noticing a lot of it and it seems to be something like what Obama is doing here, these very intentional moments of alliteration, and it sticks out to you, then maybe that would make a really good paragraph. And we can talk about that more on Thursday. And since I just brought up Obama, this isn't really related to structure, but it bears mentioning enactment is when a speaker or the writer is an example of the claim that's being made. So whenever Obama spoke about diversity, about inclusion, or this line from that same speech, what binds this nation together is not the color of our skin or the tenets of our faith, but the origins of our name. He was the first black president, first president of color. So anytime he's talking about how our identity as Americans does not have to do with our race, he's proof of that, right? And so even in my article, it's written by that dude. Let me go back there. It's written by the actual grandchild, and so there's this incredible moment of ethos, and I would say that there is some enactment, because he's directly benefited from Thomas Jefferson's legacy.